Howdy. Welcome back to Dion Talk. Recently, I did a video to add to the curriculum of the course, How to Get Started One Rental at a Time by Michael Zuber. And I've done one on self-management, and I have a video here on my channel covering the binder strategy. But really, it's the kindergarten version, 5-minute introduction to how the idea of getting a tenant to request a rent increase and a longer lease works. But for the course, I took, and it's a bit longer, but I really got into the nuances of how the binder strategy works. And with the eviction moratorium ending and with the Supreme Court finally saying that the CDC didn't have the right to do that, or however it worked out, I think that in the next few months, we're going to see a lot of tenant turnover as evictions go through, as landlords sell to get out of the business because they finally got rid of a tenant that was a problem. So with your opportunity to buy a new property or your opportunity to talk to existing tenants, I think that this strategy is going to be very important. So what you're about to see is the actual video that I uploaded to the course. I got permission from Michael Zuber to share it here so that anybody that's watching my content can get every single detail that I shared in that course. There is so much more that is offered in the course, How to Get Started One Rental at a Time, from seller financing, which I've used already, or I'm learning to use now because of the course, and self-managing, how to house hack, all of these strategies from experts. And not all of it is just Mike talking. It's people like me that come in that have done things that Mike hasn't done. So Mike is really good about knowing his lane. He knows what he does, and he can teach a great course on that. But he's added experts like me on subjects that he hasn't done. So enjoy.
Howdy. Welcome back to One Rental at a Time. This is a video I should have made a while ago. I actually made a pretty big mistake. I have a strategy that gets tenants to request a rent increase and to request longer leases. And I have a video on my channel that would cover the order that you would use this strategy in. But for this course, for Michael Zuber's course, One Rental at a Time, I wanted specific data. I was closing on a duplex in May, and I knew I had existing tenants, so it was a perfect opportunity to buy a property with tenants in place, use the strategy, get current data in today's current market, and then share those exact numbers. And literally up until the time I turned the camera on to start recording this, I realized that's a mistake. I didn't say I was smart. I said I had a strategy that gets tenants to request a rent increase and longer leases. Right, a strategy that is good and has so far worked 100% of the time, even on the place I just closed on in May. So get ready to take some notes. That guy makes me nervous. I actually think he has been around every time I made a choice that got me into trouble. Like, I don't think he's ever not been there once. The reason waiting to make this video was a mistake was because that specific data doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. The odds of somebody buying a property for the amount that I paid in a market like mine, with tenants already in place, paying the rents that they were, and having the same cash-on-cash return on investment that I have, are astronomically small. So that was a mistake. What matters is the nuances to how this strategy works. That's what I want to make in this video. That's what I want to cover. The reason why each step is done in the order that it's done and why I do it that way. The first thing to understand is why this strategy works. A lot of landlords raise the rent, or they're afraid to raise the rent on an existing tenant if the tenant is good, pays on time, doesn't have problems, fixes things themselves. So raising the rent could cause a good tenant to go away. So the landlord could be missing out on extra revenue that could be spent on improving the place because they don't want to lose a good tenant. And most times, this strategy, I've used it when I buy a property and there are tenants in place already. That doesn't mean it has to be a new property, and it doesn't mean that it has to be existing tenants. I've used this on tenants that have been renting for years. And as a matter of fact, this year, because rent prices are going up so fast, normally I do a 5% increase every other year. But this year in my market, we're seeing 20 to 40% rent increases. So I will actually be using this method on all of my tenants in every unit. So as a landlord, I don't want turnover, but I don't want to lose out on money that I could be making. One of the reasons we invest is for the return. We want our cash on cash return to be as good as possible without ripping somebody off, without making a tenant move, without disrupting their life. But these are all things that matter to the perspective of the owner. Now let's take a look at what matters to the tenant, especially when there's a property sale. Most tenants live in fear of a property that they live in being sold and the new owner just raising the rents to a point where the tenant can't afford it and they have to move. Especially tenants that have been renting from one of those landlords that doesn't raise the rent because they're a good tenant. So they know their rents are below the area average. So most tenants would think that an owner's smartest move would be to buy the property, kick the tenant out, do a rehab and update things, and then rent the place out for the area average rents, making significantly more money than what they're getting from the rent that the tenant is currently paying. Now let me go through the basics of this strategy, and then I'll kind of break down each thing in order that they're going to happen. I call this strategy the binder, because I physically make a binder for the property. And when I talk about the steps to how this works and the work that goes into it, it's going to seem like a lot. And like most things in real estate, the first time you try anything, it's kind of scary and it's new, but the second time you do it, you can teach a class. And when I made this last binder, it took about 10 minutes, maybe, and that's because I had to find the binder. One of the caveats to this strategy is that I self-manage. So if you're using a property manager, it doesn't mean that this strategy wouldn't work. It means that you might have to introduce the idea of this strategy to that property management company. The breakdown of the binder is that the cover of the binder is a picture of the property with the information of how much I paid. And some people have asked me, why would you want to show the tenant how much you paid for a property? And that's because I'm trying to show that I'm transparent. And it isn't like the tenant isn't going to be able to Google it in a couple of weeks to see exactly what the sale price was. Most people who are renting, and maybe have been renting for a long time, really don't know what the prices of properties are currently. And a number like $397,000 sounds like a lot to a tenant. This basically points out to the tenant that this is a large number, even to me, and this is a significant investment on my part. So I'm running it like a business, and my goal is to make money. The next page of the binder is a map of the area that the rental's in, with pinpoints of the rentals in the area that have the same number of bedrooms, and same things like a garage, or if you had a pool or a fenced yard, try to make them as similar as possible. After the map, the first couple of pages, I like to put in the lowest priced rentals in the area. And I'll explain why in a minute. And then after that, I have a list of the rentals in the area with each of their prices listed out. The idea is the current tenant is paying lower than the area average rents. So when they see what the current area average rents are, they would know that your best option as the owner or the new owner of the property would be to have them move out, do a rehab, put new tenants in, and get maximum amount of rent that you can. But not today. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to disrupt the tenant's life, and I don't want to have to do a rehab. And if you do the math, it takes sometimes a few years to even break even on having a tenant move out. You have the time that the place is empty that you're not collecting rent, the rehab, the cost of the rehab, finding the contractor, the time cost for me to even manage the project of doing a tenant turnover, advertise a tenant, screen a tenant, place a tenant. All of those things that we can skip by just having this conversation with the binder. Now that the tenant's seen it, they know what they're paying, they know what you paid for the property, they know what the area average rents are. I slide the binder to the tenant and I ask them, what do you think would be fair? And so far, 100% of the time, every single tenant has asked for the rents to go up, not quite to the area average rent, a bit below, so they know they're still getting a good deal, but they offer enough so that I'm not tempted to just ask them to leave or to evict them or to force them out and then do a rehab and put a new tenant in. 100% of the time. Now, don't leave yet. You have the details of the binder. You paid for a course, and I want to make sure you get the nuanced details, the way that this actually works, kind of the psychology behind each step. Well, the psychology and the timeline, because there is not only just an order to how you do this, but certain amounts of time between steps. An example is, there has been times when I purchase a property and just because of the situation, it makes sense to immediately, within a couple of days, have the binder talk with the tenants. But that's not my normal way. What I like to do is purchase a property, introduce myself as a new owner. I use the landlord introduction letter. You can Google those, they're pretty simple. But then I wait a couple of months. This gives me first a chance to kind of screen the tenants because they are already in place and I didn't get to screen them. So they might not have the credit score that I want. And they might have an eviction on their record, things that I check for when I'm placing a tenant. So those 2 months, maybe 3 months is a time to vet the tenant. Do they pay on time? Are there noise complaints? Do I have to call them and tell them to clean up the yard? Do they call me for trivial things that they shouldn't? So far, I've been pretty lucky and have had good tenants. But if I ever had a not so good tenant, I would choose to not renew the lease. So the idea is 2 to 3 months later, I ask to have a face-to-face meeting so that I can go to their house and actually have the binder discussion with them. Another thing that waiting a couple of months does for me is it gives me a chance to impress the tenants. Not all landlords have the best reputation. A couple of bad apples ruin it for most of us. So what I like to do is to do a couple of small upgrades that I'm going to list out for you. Some extra nuggets of information from a video about the binder. These small upgrades and actually asking the tenants a certain question makes the tenants want to stay. And it might increase their anxiety level a little bit that I'm going to kick them out. I actually had a tenant, before I did the binder strategy, approach me and ask if they could raise their rent $155 a month if I would sign a year lease with them. These tenants had been living there a few years and the place had pretty much been neglected by the previous owner. So since I was doing these small upgrades, not actually spending very much money, they were pretty sure I was fixing the place up to kick them out and bring somebody in at a higher rent. And these upgrades aren't very complicated. When I acquire a property, one of the first things that I do, and this actually might have a bigger impact because I prefer to buy in Class C neighborhoods, so tenants aren't used to these things. The first thing I do is I put in coded locks. I use Schlag locks and I check Lowe's, Home Depot, and Amazon for when they're on sale, and I pick up a couple at $89 a piece. Not very many Class C tenants are used to not having to have keys. And then I put in motion sensor LED lights. They're like $35 from Lowe's or Home Depot. And I put them out in the front and the back of the property. Another small upgrade that saves the tenants on electricity cost, but they're super bright, and in a Class C area, that can have a good impact on your tenants. So these are pretty much the standard 2 upgrades that I do at every rental that I acquire. Then I ask the tenant this question. The first time I did this, the real estate agent that I was working with, who has since retired, told me that I shouldn't do this, but I still do it every time. I asked the tenants if tomorrow they were the new owners of this property, what is the first thing that they would fix or change? My real estate agent was afraid that they were going to ask for something big like add a den, put an electronic gate at the front, something that would cost a lot of money. That's never happened. So far, the most expensive thing a tenant has asked for is a screen door. $100. Plus, I got to work with the handyman to learn how to put one of those on. Another tenant asked for a new sink. The sink in the kitchen was really short, so they couldn't get pans into the sink. On a new sink with the high rise with the little hose that comes out. That tenant is still in place, and I've never had problems with them. Small upgrades to make a tenant happy to help limit tenant turnover. And if this is done before you do the binder is much more effective because the tenant has the mindset that should be true that you're now going to be taking care of the property. The next thing that I do works both for tenants that are in a place that you already own or tenants in place that you just acquired. And you don't have to do this. This is just something that I do because one of my goals is to impress the tenant and let them know that I'm not just here to make every penny possible and I don't care about them. I'm actually going to take care of the property, but I don't want to lose money. Once the tenant has agreed on a price, and it's set in stone, we have both agreed we are going to sign a new lease for this amount of money. After that's decided, because now the tenant is thinking next month, this is the increase that I'm going to have to my expenses. I offer a 90-day delay. I don't say something like, here in Washington State, there's a 60-day requirement to increase rents beyond a certain amount, because that's true. I offer 90 days and then we make the change. So they're going to get 3 months at their current rate, even though we've already just now agreed to a new price. I'm offering to give them 3 months to mentally get their mind around having a new expense. That has made tenants very happy every time I've done it. And as we're wrapping up, there's one last little Jedi mind trick thing that I throw out. I just kind of casually mention, if we had a 2-year lease, then next year I couldn't increase your rent on you. I would like a 2-year lease because I'm getting the new rent, which is where I want it. But that's another year that I don't have to screen a tenant, place a tenant, do a rehab. And yes, I might miss out on a little bit of an increase next year. But in 2 years, we'll do the binder method again. They'll be ready for it. And like I said, this year, because rents are going up so fast, I'm doing it with every single tenant. And so far, almost every tenant has come back and said, wait a minute, can we sign a 2-year lease? Which, check your local laws, because here in Washington State, if a lease is longer than a year, it has to be notarized. So if you know a notary, great. From start to finish, what you're trying to do is have a meeting with your tenants where they ask for a rent increase and they leave the meeting happy. But just in case you logged into this video to get the details, because we talk about it on Mike's channel a lot, I purchased this property for $397,000. Original offer was $400,000. The inspection report allowed me to negotiate $2,500 off. Rents were at $1,150, and with that, it didn't really cash flow very well. I wanted at least $1,300 to get a little over an 8% cash-on-cash return. It was like 8.6 when I did the math. I did the binder with the first tenant, and their rent increase request was to $1,460, which gave me a nice number to mention to the other tenant, because it's a duplex. I know they were going to talk. And so, since their rents were currently the same, my goal was that they ended the same so that they didn't later feel like one of them was being taken advantage of. So in the second use of the binder, I mentioned what the first tenant's new rent is at a certain point when it made sense. Now my cash-on-cash return is above 10%, which is my goal. But I was having trouble finding properties that met my goal over a couple of months. So the area average rents in this area are $1,550 or so. And there's one last thing that I should have mentioned earlier. The reason I list the lowest rented properties first is because a tenant is also going to do a search. And what they're going to find is low-income housing. So they're going to think, I can get apartments for not much more than this. Why would I ask for a rent increase? And during the conversation, I point out that when you do a search for apartments, make sure you call and ask, are these for low income? Because the listed out area average was above $1,600. So I am missing out on some rent. If I had these tenants move out and I did a full rehab, I could be getting at least $100 more a month. So $1,200 a year. But a rehab with flooring, because for some reason these duplexes have carpet, which I hate. So taking out all of the carpet, disposing of all of the carpet, putting in new flooring, painting, would be somewhere between $4,000 and $7,000 depending on current prices, because right now materials aren't so cheap. So I'm saving $4,000+ to lose out on $1,200 a year and possibly a month's worth of rent, because it would take me time to do the tenant turnover and I would disrupt the tenant's life. To me, the binder strategy is nearly perfect because it matches up with my lazy. And I make jokes about being lazy, but translate lazy to super busy. I run a truck driving school with 60 employees. We broke 2,000 students in 2020. I run a nonprofit that does job placement assistance, and I'm finding my real passion is making YouTube videos. And don't let this go to your head, Mike, but I really appreciate the opportunity to come on every Thursday with you and share concepts that are stuck in my head with people that could possibly help them get to financial freedom. This is a huge gift that you give to me every time I'm on your channel. So thanks, Mike. Thanks a lot for watching this video. If If you ever have any questions, always feel free to reach out and ask. I try to answer every question that comes my way. If you email me and I don't email you back, email me again, because I get a few and my memory's not perfect, so I might miss it. Until my next lesson, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.